I thought I knew everything about my best friend Jake. We'd been inseparable since we were 7 years old, shared every secret, every dream, every embarrassing moment. But last Tuesday, when he called me at 2 a.m. with his voice shaking, I realized I didn't know him at all. What he told me that night didn't just change everything between us, it made me question every single moment we'd shared for the past 15 years. Some secrets are too big to keep, and some revelations destroy more than just friendships. If you want to know what Jake was hiding, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Jake Martinez and I became best friends on the worst day of 2nd grade. I was the new kid, sitting alone at lunch with my dinosaur lunchbox, when 3 older kids decided to make me their target. They knocked my sandwich to the floor and were about to dump chocolate milk on my head when Jake appeared out of nowhere. "Leave him alone," he said, standing between me and the bullies even though he was smaller than all of them. That day, Jake got a black eye defending me, but he never complained. He just grinned and said, "Now we're brothers in battle." From that moment on, we were inseparable. We lived 3 houses apart on Maple Street, spent every weekend together, and knew each other's families better than our own. Jake's mom, Maria, treated me like a second son, always setting an extra plate at dinner. My parents adored Jake. He was polite, funny, and the kind of kid every parent wishes their child would befriend. Throughout middle school and high school, while other friendships came and went, ours remained unshakable. We double-dated to prom, spent summers working at the same pizza place, and even got accepted to the same college. Jake was my constant, the one person I could count on no matter what. But looking back now, I realize there were signs I completely missed. Jake never had serious girlfriends, even though girls were constantly asking him out. He was incredibly good-looking, tall, athletic, with those dark eyes that made people do double takes, but he always found excuses. "I'm focused on school," or "I'm not ready for anything serious." There were other small things too. The way he sometimes seemed distant during conversations about girls. How he'd change the subject whenever I talked about my relationships. The phone calls he'd take in private, walking away from me with hushed voices and nervous laughter. I thought I was being a good friend by not prying. I respected his privacy and assumed he'd tell me when he was ready. After all, we told each other everything, or so I believed. The first real crack in our perfect friendship appeared during our junior year of college. Jake started spending time with Marcus, a guy from his psychology class. At first, I was happy he was making new friends, but something felt different. Jake would cancel our usual hangouts to study with Marcus, and when I'd text him, he'd take hours to respond, something that had never happened before. One night, I decided to surprise him at his dorm with pizza and beer. When I knocked on his door, I heard scrambling inside, hushed voices, and what sounded like someone hiding. Jake opened the door slightly, looking flustered and blocking my view inside. "Hey man, not a good time," he said quickly. "Marcus and I are cramming for a big exam." But I could see Marcus in the background, shirtless and looking just as nervous as Jake. What was really happening in that dorm room? And why was Jake lying to me for the first time in our 15-year friendship? Let me know in the comments what you think was going on. After that night at Jake's dorm, everything felt different between us. I couldn't shake the image of Marcus looking so nervous, or the way Jake practically slammed the door in my face. For the first time in our friendship, I felt like an outsider. I started paying closer attention to Jake's behavior, and the more I watched, the more confused I became. He was happier than I'd seen him in years, actually. There was a lightness in his step, a constant smile, and he was always checking his phone with this secretive grin. But whenever I asked about it, he'd deflect. "You're different lately," I finally confronted him one afternoon as we walked across campus. "Good different, but secretive. What's going on with you?" Jake's face clouded over, and for a moment, I thought he might actually tell me the truth. Instead, he forced a laugh. "Nothing's going on, Danny. You're being paranoid. Maybe you need to get a girlfriend and stop analyzing my every move." That hurt. In all our years of friendship, Jake had never dismissed me like that or made me feel stupid for caring about him. I wanted to push harder, but something in his eyes, fear, maybe, made me back off. The distance between us grew wider over the next few months. Jake started making plans without including me, and when I'd ask to join, he'd make excuses. "It's just a study group, or you wouldn't find it interesting." Marcus was around more and more, and I began to resent this guy who seemed to be replacing me as Jake's closest friend. My girlfriend Sarah noticed my mood. "You're obsessing over this," she said during one of our dates when I couldn't stop talking about Jake's strange behavior. "Maybe he's just growing up, Danny. People change in college. Maybe you need to accept that you two aren't going to be joined at the hip forever." But this felt like more than growing apart. This felt like Jake was living a completely separate life and actively hiding it from me. The worst part was, I could see he was struggling with something. Sometimes I'd catch him staring off into space with this tortured expression, like he was wrestling with some internal battle. Other times, he'd seem on the verge of telling me something important, opening his mouth to speak before shaking his head and changing the subject. The breaking point came during spring break. Jake was supposed to come home with me to spend the week with my family, a tradition we'd kept since freshman year. 2 days before break, he called to cancel. "I'm staying on campus," he said, his voice tight. "Marcus and I have this project to work on." "Jake, it's spring break. What project could be that important?" There was a long pause. "You wouldn't understand, Danny. It's complicated." "Try me," I said, frustration finally boiling over. "I'm your best friend. When did I become too stupid to understand your life?" "That's not what I meant," he said quickly, and I could hear the pain in his voice. I can't explain right now. I'm sorry." Why was Jake pulling away from his lifelong best friend? What was so complicated that he couldn't trust me with it? Share your theories below. That spring break was torture. I spent the entire week wondering what Jake was doing, who he was with, and why I wasn't good enough to be part of his life anymore. My parents kept asking where he was. Jake had become like family to them too, and I had to keep making excuses that sounded hollow even to me. When we returned to campus, I noticed Jake looked different. Thinner, like he hadn't been eating well, with dark circles under his eyes. But whenever I tried to express concern, he'd brush me off with fake cheerfulness that made everything worse. "I'm fine, Danny. Stop worrying so much," he'd say, but his hands would shake slightly when he thought I wasn't looking. The final straw came in early April. I was walking past the campus coffee shop when I saw Jake and Marcus sitting in a corner booth, having what looked like an intense conversation. Marcus was holding Jake's hand across the table, and Jake was crying. Not just tearing up, actually crying, with his head in his free hand while Marcus rubbed his shoulder comfortingly. I stood there frozen, watching my best friend break down in front of someone who wasn't me. In 15 years of friendship, I'd seen Jake cry maybe 3 times: when his dog died, when he broke his leg in high school, and when his grandmother passed away. Each time, I had been the one comforting him. Now he was turning to a virtual stranger while shutting me out completely. Something inside me snapped. I walked into the coffee shop and approached their table. Both of them looked up, startled, and Jake quickly wiped his eyes. "Oh, hey Danny," he said, his voice thick. "We were just..." "Just what?" I interrupted, my voice louder than I intended. "Just having another secret conversation that I'm apparently not allowed to be part of?" Marcus started to stand up. Maybe I should go. No, I said firmly. Don't go anywhere. I want to know what's so important that my best friend of 15 years can't trust me with it, but he can cry about it with someone he's known for 6 months. Jake's face went pale. Danny, please. Not here. Not now. Then when? I demanded, feeling hurt and anger and confusion all mixing together. When will you finally trust me enough to tell me what's going on? What could possibly be so terrible that you'd rather lose our friendship than tell me the truth? The coffee shop had gone quiet around us. Other students were staring, but I didn't care. I was tired of being shut out, tired of feeling like I was losing my best friend to some secret I couldn't understand. Jake looked at Marcus, then back at me, and I saw something break in his expression. You really want to know? He whispered, his voice barely audible. Yes, I said. I want to know everything. Jake took a shaky breath, glanced around the coffee shop, then back at me. Not here, he said finally. Come to my room tonight. 10 o'clock. And Danny, after tonight, everything between us might change. What secret was Jake finally ready to reveal? And why was he so terrified that it would destroy our friendship? Let me know what you think is coming next. I spent the rest of that day in agony, running through every possible scenario in my head. Was Jake sick? In trouble with the law? Had he done something terrible that he was ashamed of? My mind went to the darkest places, imagining secrets so awful they would justify months of lies and distance. By 9:45 p.m., I was standing outside Jake's dorm room, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. Part of me wanted to turn around and walk away. If Jake was right, if this secret would change everything between us, maybe I was better off not knowing. But I couldn't live with the not knowing anymore. I knocked. Jake opened the door immediately, like he'd been waiting right behind it. His room was unusually neat, like he'd been cleaning to avoid thinking. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. Sit down, Jake said quietly, gesturing to his desk chair while he perched on the edge of his bed. The distance between us felt enormous. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Jake kept starting to say something, then stopping, his hands clenched in his lap. Finally, he looked up at me with eyes full of terror. Danny, I need you to promise me something, he said. No matter what I tell you, no matter how you feel about it, promise me you won't tell my parents. Not yet. I need to be the one to tell them, when I'm ready. The fear in his voice scared me more than anything else had. Jake, you're scaring me. Just tell me what's going on. He took a deep, shuddering breath. I'm gay, Danny. The words hung in the air between us like a physical thing. I stared at him, processing what he just said, and suddenly so many pieces clicked into place. The lack of serious girlfriends. The secret of phone calls. Marcus. The way Jake had looked so terrified about telling me. And Marcus. I started. Marcus is my boyfriend, Jake finished quietly. We've been together for 8 months. I love him, Danny. I'm in love with him, and I've been living in hell because I couldn't tell you. Because I was terrified you'd hate me. That you'd think I was disgusting. That you'd never want to see me again. Tears were streaming down his face now. I know your family is religious. I know how you were raised. And I know that losing you would destroy me, but I couldn't keep lying anymore. I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. I sat there in stunned silence, watching my best friend fall apart in front of me, and realized I was faced with the most important moment of our entire friendship. How would you react if your lifelong best friend revealed something that challenged everything you thought you knew about them? What would you say in this moment? The silence stretched between us for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Jake was crying now, really crying, his whole body shaking with 15 years' worth of suppressed fear and shame. And I just sat there, frozen, trying to reconcile the Jake I thought I knew with this revelation that changed absolutely everything and absolutely nothing at the same time. "Please say something," Jake whispered, his voice breaking. "Even if you hate me, just say something." That's when it hit me. Jake thought I might hate him. My best friend, the person who had defended me against bullies, who had been there for every major moment of my life, thought I might reject him for being gay. The realization broke something open in my chest. "Jake," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "Look at me." He reluctantly raised his eyes to meet mine. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day when you got a black eye defending me?" He shook his head slightly. "You said, 'Now we're brothers in battle.'" "Brothers, Jake. Do you think something like this would change that?" Hope flickered in his eyes, but fear was still dominant. "I don't know. I thought maybe you'd think I was disgusting. Or that I'd been lying to you our whole friendship. Or that I'd been, I don't know, checking you out or something gross like that." I couldn't help but laugh, which made Jake look at me like I'd lost my mind. "Jake, you idiot. You beautiful, stupid idiot. Do you know how many nights I've laid awake worried that something terrible was wrong with you? That you were sick, or in trouble, or that you hated me? You were worried about me? Of course I was worried about you. You're my best friend and you were clearly miserable. I thought I was losing you to some terrible secret, and it turns out you were just in love? And afraid to tell me about it?" Jake's tears were flowing freely now, but they looked different, lighter somehow. "So you don't think I'm disgusting?" "The only thing I think is disgusting is that you've been carrying this alone for so long. And that you thought so little of our friendship that you believed I'd abandon you over something like this." "Danny, No, let me finish," I interrupted, standing up and sitting on the bed next to him. "I'm hurt that you didn't trust me. I'm angry that you let me think I was losing my best friend. And I'm furious that you've been torturing yourself for months because you were afraid of my reaction." I put my arm around his shoulders like I'd done 1,000 times before. "But mostly, I'm just relieved that you're okay, and that you trust me enough to finally tell me the truth." Was this the end of their problems, or just the beginning of a new chapter in their friendship? What challenges were still ahead? Jake collapsed against me, sobbing with what I could only describe as relief. 15 years of friendship, and this was the first time I'd seen him completely break down and build himself back up in the span of minutes. We sat there for a long time, not talking, just letting the weight of his secret finally lift from both of our shoulders. "I want to meet him," I said eventually. "Marcus. I want to meet your boyfriend properly." Jake pulled back to look at me. "Really? Really? And I want to hear about how you guys met, and when you knew you liked him, and all the stuff best friends are supposed to know about each other's relationships. I've missed 8 months of your life, Jake. I want to catch up." Over the next few hours, Jake told me everything. How he'd known he was different since high school but had been too terrified to admit it, even to himself. How meeting Marcus had been the first time he'd felt truly understood. How the guilt of hiding it from me had been eating him alive, but the fear of losing me had been even worse. "My parents don't know yet," he admitted as the night wore on. "Marcus keeps saying I should tell them, but I'm terrified. What if they disown me? What if they never speak to me again?" I thought about Jake's parents, Maria, who had always treated me like a son, and Carlos, who had taught both of us how to change oil and throw a proper punch. They loved Jake unconditionally, but I understood his fear. "When you're ready," I told him, "I'll be there with you." If you want me to be, you'd do that? Jake, I'd do anything for you. That hasn't changed. Nothing has changed except now I understand why you were so miserable, and why you're so happy now. The next few weeks were like getting my best friend back from the dead. Jake was lighter, funnier, more himself than he'd been in months. I got to know Marcus properly, not as the guy who was stealing my best friend, but as the person who made Jake laugh until his sides hurt and who clearly adored him. It wasn't all smooth sailing. Jake's coming out to his parents was difficult, though they ultimately embraced both him and Marcus with the kind of love I'd always admired in their family. There were adjustments, conversations about boundaries and new dynamics, but our friendship didn't just survive, it became stronger. 6 months later, when Jake asked me to be his best man at his commitment ceremony with Marcus, I realized that some secrets aren't meant to destroy relationships, they're meant to deepen them. Sometimes the things we're most afraid to reveal are the things that bring us closer together. Have you ever had a friendship tested by a big revelation? Looking back, I realize that Jake's secret was never really about him being gay, it was about fear. Fear of rejection, fear of change, fear of losing the people who mattered most. We almost lost 15 years of friendship not because of who Jake was, but because he was afraid of who he was. Today, Jake and Marcus have been married for 3 years. Jake is a family therapist who specializes in helping LGBTQ+ youth, and I'm the proud godfather to their adopted daughter, Emma. Sometimes I wonder how different things might have been if Jake had trusted me with his truth earlier, but then I remember that we all reveal ourselves in our own time, in our own way. The best friendships aren't the ones without secrets, they're the ones strong enough to survive the truth. If you enjoyed this story about friendship, love, and acceptance, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real-life stories that remind us what truly matters in life.